Governance and power to govern has been one of the burning issues worldwide. When you turn the pages of history, we see a nation changing, a nation in a transitional phase, followed by a change in ideologies and how a country has been governed. Should the power be restricted in a few hands, or should the power be for the people, by the people, or from the people? Hence, today's discussion will be based on whether a benevolent dictatorship or a democracy is good for the nation. This House prefers benevolent dictatorship over fragile democracy in developing nation will be our main topic today. And for that, in our ruling parties, we have Team Sarva Shaktiman, and from the opposition parties, we have Team Three Logos. Namaste and welcome to the new episode of Debate Star. You are watching us exclusively in News 24 television, and I'm your host, Subin Limbu. Our sponsors are
Title sponsor, Education Park, in association with Mercy Education, powered by OS Studies, IELTS partner, British Council, brought to you by Golden Gate International College, Maple International Education, main sponsor, SIEC, sponsors, METS International Education and Visa Services, The Next Education Consultancy, Scope Student Services, Professional Education Consultancy, Cambridge Institute of Technology, Banking partner, Everest Bank Limited. Co-sponsors, Oasis Career Advisor, supported by Hisan, in partnership with Debate Network Nepal, organized by Abhiyan Multimedia. Media partner, Annapurna Sampurna. Creative partner, Fulcrum Consulting Private Limited. Exclusively on News 24 television.
Now is the time for a short break.
Welcome to our enriching park, where you interact with our expert advisors, explore your career opportunities, test your potential, and truly begin your educational journey abroad for a brighter tomorrow. Education Park. Call us for more details.
Mercy Education is committed to providing you with the best available pathways for Australia, USA, UK, Canada and New Zealand. Our services includes confidential career counseling from our expert counselors, proper guidance and assistance through every step of the application process, easy way for visa processing, preparing the student for visa interview. We provide thorough training and comprehensive practice to ensure high score in the following test preparation classes: IELTS, TOEFL, SAT, PTE. We make sure that you achieve your dream of studying abroad. Mercy Education.
शिक्षाको लागि अस्ट्रेलिया, गन्तव्य तपाईको साथ हाम्रो OS Studies.
This is the new episode of Debate Star, and today's topic to discuss is this House prefers benevolent dictatorship over fragile democracy in developing nation. Before moving on to the main event, I'd like to introduce our judges. I'd like to introduce our judge, Professor Dr. Surendra Kesi. We also have Nepali actress Sanchita Luitel. We also have President of Hisan, Professor Ramesh Sival. We are very humbled to have you here. thank you for your time. For the ruling parties, we have Team Saktiman. And for the opposition party, we have Team Three Logos. Each team consists of 3 members. Moving on to the introduction round of the teams, I'd like to start with the ruling party.
I am Omisha Raimaji, and I will be the Prime Minister for this debate.
I am Pragan Acharya. I'll be speaking as the Deputy Prime Minister.
I am Pratyush Kimre, the government whip from the side proposition.
I'd like to request the opposition party, Team Three Logos, to introduce themselves.
I'm Srijan Paudel, and I'll be the leader of opposition.
I'm Savishwa Karel, speaking as the deputy leader.
Hello, my name is Suranjan Nepal, and I will be the opposition whip.
I'd like to call upon the Prime Minister from the ruling party to give her thoughts on this matter.
Panel. The benevolent dictatorship in this debate are not countries like North Korea with Kim Jong-un or Syria with Bashar al-Assad. It's countries like China, where we have one individual with centralized power ruling the country. The essential characteristic of these sort of benevolent dictatorship is stability, where we have grounds for economic progress and strong national security. Understand that these dictators are not atrocious dictators. These are benevolent dictators. Dictators that listen to people, that care about the people, and at the very least cater towards the interest of the people. Because they have the incentive to remain in power, to continue their regime, and to constantly remain in power, because else there will be an uprising, there will be a rebellion that's a massive threat towards them. Fragile democracies, on the other hand, are countries that are haunted with conflict and chaos that leads to large levels of stagnancy that stops the development. These are countries like after the Arab Springs, like countries like Iran or Libya, where we've seen Shia and Sunni conflicts absolutely heighten after the onset of democracy, where we've seen a total state of anarchy. It's also countries somewhat like Bangladesh or Venezuela before it went downhill, where we see that the state is massively failing and that the state lacks legitimacy among the people, where people do not believe in the state anymore, where people are absolutely hopeless. These countries are often results of Western intervention, and these countries are multi-ethnic, where there is so much of diversity and so much of clashing opinions and ideas to come to any sort of conclusion. These states are often out of touch of modern democratic processes, and at its very core, people are unhappy and people are hopeless in these sort of countries, and we think that that in itself is a fundamental problem that our side addresses. 2 arguments that side proposition brings to this debate. First argument is that benevolent dictatorship brings in stability on the country. 3 things to say under this. First, let's look at what their side looks like. First, it looks like the perpetuation of active corruption, where we see large finances are directed away from the governmental projects and into the pockets of politicians, where we see that even if people vote, this vote is not actualized because politicians are working on self-interest or under the interest of businessmen or corporations. Second, we see the inertia of bureaucracy, where we see things like constitutional delay that happened in Nepal itself, where we see governmental workers have no incentive to cater towards the people. Third thing we see is that collective consensus when it comes to decision-making doesn't exist, where the society is so diverse with clashing ethnicities, with clashing religions, and clashing identities that people are not able to empathize with one another. It's countries like Thailand and Pakistan where this sort of collective consensus, absence of this sort of collective consensus has resulted in a threat of military coup and actual autocracy and actual tyranny popping up, where we see that this sort of collective consensus is absent not only among the people, but also in the parliament. We think that this is problematic and that we need stability, which comes from centralization of power on our side. Second argument is that minorities are worse off. Because it's a failed state with so much of ethnic diversity, we think that these sort of ethnic divides are absolutely politicized. We've seen this happen in countries like Sudan, where 2 rival groups, which were battling in the battleground, then resulted in these 2 rival groups battling in parliament, where we saw that these parties were getting voters on the basis of ethnic superiority, where we saw too much of conflict to bring out any reforms, even in the parliament. at its very worst, we think that whenever these ethnic divides are politicized, we think that rivalry is further perpetuated, where we think that it leads to situations of wars and conflict even furthermore. That is why we saw that the country of Sudan actually divided and seceded into South Sudan. We think that this is exclusive to their side, and it doesn't exist on our side, because when we have a dictator, this dictator constantly brings out this idea of us and unity, and brings out this idea of national rhetorics within the people. We think that this brings out a common ground for people to empathize with one another, for people to relate to one another, and we think that people have the ability to look beyond their religion, look beyond their identity that comes out from ethnicity. We think this is important, and that is why we propose.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your strong views. Now I'd like to call upon the leader from the opposition party.
Respected judges, please do not be swayed by the physical outcomes that they bring in side proposition, because we as humans have rights more than physical benefits or the economic benefits that we bring in their side of the house. We say that it's important for humans to have a right to expression, right to autonomy, right to decide the kind of development they want to see, and right to be involved in the development process in on itself. That kind of process is only possible when we institute the democracy, no matter how weak, right? So notice, even in the fragile democratic state as they want to define as South Sudan and things as such, those countries are illiberal democracies, not the fragile ones. Fragile ones are more characterized by lack of stability in the system. But even if there is a lack of stability, there is a kind of representation that we give in the state, which is never provided in a state of dictatorship. Why is that problematic? Because we are not concerned about the kind of development or the extent of development that they bring, but more about the kind of development people want to see. And that is more important, because notice that even if all of us want to concede that Birendra King was the benevolent dictator, all people wanted was to overthrow him into a system of democracy, and the most benevolent act he did in his entire world was to give democracy to the people. When people do not get to define the kind of development, the problem is twofold. First, notice that I never chose the consequences of the development. A dictator chose something for me, but I have to suffer the consequences. That is, to me, that is never relevant to me in the first place. The kind of consequence is never relevant. Secondly, the question of accountability. Notice that a dictator in a system is not accountable to the people. But in a system in democracy, even if it's an empty principle, even in that particular case, there are systems in place. Legislature, executive, judiciary who provide feedback. There is free media and press, right to expression, which individuals always involved in a discourse. Also notice, why are we involved in a debate today? Because the opinion that are formed by the Prime Minister will be more refined by the time we reach the end of this debate. Because in a dictatorship, Prime Minister defines what he wants to do. He never has an incentive to bring people to the discourse, because that will lead them to liberalization, that will lead them to overthrowing him. That is why he never wants that certain discourses to happen. And through the process of those discourse, we evolve to become more self-perception things. Like, for example, even if that people believe that is happiness, it's good, right? Notice that 300 years ago, people used to believe Sati Pratha was right. The women used to die with dignity, but only through discourse, feedback, expression and constant criticism from sides that are present, like opposition and things as such, we have been able to achieve a sustainable level of development. We have been able to achieve the evolution in perception. Even if we concede the kind of development they see, we bring about the perceptual change in people, the foundational change, which are most important, because we people are not animals who just require food and clothes to live. We are much more than that in the capacity that we want to define ourselves at more than our productive labor and the things that we do for this dictator. We want a definition for ourselves. That is why we want weak democracy at least. Thank you very much.
Now is the time for a short break, and we'll be right back.
Be strong as iron. Be precious as gold. Golden Gate International College, Wisdom Tower, Trikoti Colony, Old Baneswar, 32 Putali, Kathmandu. Phone 4477 082 4466 795 4495 165.
Study in Canada. Start journey with Maple Education. Think Canada. Think Maple. पुतली सडक काठमाडौँ।
Your call?
Thanks babe.
के छ यार तेरो खबर?
मेरो त दामी छ यार, युनिभर्सिटी नि बवाल पाइहाले, जब नि दामी छ, अर्निङ नि दामी छ। I'm too satisfied man, too satisfied.
एडमिसन त सँगै गरियो, बेकारमा क्लास नगएर। अब म पनि SIC बाटै अस्ट्रेलिया प्रोसेसिङ गर्छु।
SIEC, study in Australia.
I'm the best. I'm the best.
You are the next. You are the next.
You are the next.
Welcome to the Next Education Consultancy. We provide classes for IELTS, PTE and abroad study counseling for Australia and New Zealand. The Next Education Consultancy. Head office, Putali Sadak, Kathmandu.
It's a new day today. Not a day to make excuses, not to put it off for tomorrow. It's about today. It's your chance. This is your opportunity. It's your dream. Live it. Push forward. Turn the average into the extraordinary. Steadfast in your commitment and then you'll still have work to do. Because stopping is not your option. Promise yourself to be an achiever. Make success into your reality. So why settle for anything less? Professional Education Consultancy. Connecting to success.
Mates Education. Aba hami bhayeka chhau. Mates International. We provide IELTS preparation classes, abroad study counseling program for study in Australia and many more. Mates International. Shahid Chowk, Narayangarh, Cinema Road, Parsa.
Are you interested to study in Australia? Visa guidance under registered migration experts. Study abroad for a greater tomorrow. Scope Student Services.
Now I'd like to request Deputy Prime Minister from the ruling party to share his views.
Ladies and gentlemen, side opposition in this debate would want to talk about people and what people want in this debate, right? So on that very point, the real question to answer in this debate is what do people want? People want shelter. People want livelihood. People want access to basic services, subsidies for facilities we deem essential, such as healthcare, education, housing. People want to have confidence in their governance and economy and would certainly not want to have to go out in search for economic sustenance. The comparative on opposition is quite evident. It is political transition and economic stagnancy. First, let's talk about economics in this debate, because it is important that in developing nations, we have sustainability, and by that I'm referring to bureaucratic inertia that exists on opposition. The time it takes to make a policy decision, or the time it takes to recognize things such as structural unemployment for welfare payments, these things become absolutely important when we have rampant corruption like that in Brazil with Operation Car Wash alongside Petrobras, the biggest scandal in South American history, where even the president of Brazil, Lula da Silva, was involved. The president who was all in highs in terms of voting polls. And eventually it led to the rise of populist leaders like Bolsonaro in Brazil, right? So on this very point, voting isn't as sweet as it seems it is, right? And eventually, what the comparative on our side is that you just don't get swifter economic processes, but also readdress to the poor in the nation, because assimilation of them becomes important, because the benevolent dictator would want to prevent any form of conflict coming from the poor, so they have an active incentive to cater to the poor. Also, you don't have collusion between political parties and big corporations, because you don't need, funding for political parties with collusion with corporations. This means infrastructural projects are more directed to the people, and corporate crackdown is better possible on our side of the house. A more inclusive framework that prevents gerrymandering against the poor is essential on our side, and economic stagnancy and lackluster infrastructure projects can be seen on theirs and also in Nepal. Second, let's talk about conflicts. In the absence of nationalism on their side, politicization polarizes ethnic or religious divides and increases atrocities and fuels hatred. We have three things to say on this. First, power in fragile democracies are either concentrated in the hands of an oligarchic, socially privileged group, or comes from populist rhetorics like that of Duterte in Philippines, which isn't a representation at all, because it comes at the cost of active curtailing and demonization of minorities, right? So they might give you benefits that exist in a modern democracy, but they show no linkage to a fragile democracy. Second, even if you have representation at the best case, it comes at a trade-off to your right to access basic amenities or even work in your country. We believe rights exist in a hierarchy. If you have to go to Saudi Arabia to work, flee your nation like Venezuela, or remain as polarized and targeted minorities, minority like the Muslims in India, there is no point of their pseudo-democracy. Third, the fact that stability and access exist under a benevolent dictator, we grant people rights through this centralized system. And if right to vote is not present there, we're willing to trade this off, because note that they never necessarily show to you the benefits of the right to vote that exists, given the fact that we say that their representation is not possible. Finally, strong men that act as benevolent dictators on our side also go a long way to prevent foreign intervention from nations like US, or in a counterfactual, maybe India too. This is important because these democracies are fragile because of these very Western interventions. Probably Nepal would not have been influenced by India.
Now I'd like to introduce and request our deputy leader from the opposition party to give his views on this matter.
Panel, dictator, no matter how benevolent, confines political power and means of production to him and people close to him. It is by confining those political and economic power that he manages to exert his control throughout this population. This brings about certain problems and conflicts which will usually turn benevolent dictatorship into fragile democracy, or worse, autocracy, and the stability that they have proclaimed in their side of the house will not exist. I'll show you this in a deductive manner. First, why will it not exist? See, the fact that wealth is unequally distributed even in a benevolent dictatorship towards the kins of those dictator means that people who are already rich will get even more rich because of natural property of wealth. People will be able to invest more and get even rich, right? Redistribution of rich will not take place at their side of the house because dictators holds their power by actually holding on to that wealth. Now, when this redistribution of this wealth does not take place, it results in a political unrest as people feel that they are suppressed from opportunities and so on. This inequality and suppression from main politics was the reason that caused revolution in Russia, Great Britain, France, and any other countries where you can think about revolution. That is to say, the entire history of human revolutions has been history of inequality and people striving for equality to remove an inherent characteristic of benevolence. Now, in other instances where people might not actually rise up, there might be a power struggle between the ruling class themselves, between the people closely related to the dictators themselves. And this might result in an autocratic dictator taking place of a benevolent dictator, and we will be having all the problems of extreme autocracy, respected panel. Notice that in our side of the house, in fragile democracy, even if wealth is unequally distributed, people can still rise to the uppermost hierarchy and still get political representation if they have enough wealth and if they manage to gain sufficient incentive, and such violent revolutions won't occur. In their side of the house, violent revolution is followed by fragile democracy, like in our side of the house.
Sir.
So that means all the disadvantages of fragile democracy in our side of the house pertain to their side of the house as well.
Question,
respected panel, rejected right now. Dictatorship has incentive to curb innovation because innovation will take people from lower strata of the society to higher strata of society. Imagine an autocratic government being a strong world power. Then it will encourage autocratic or let's say dictatorial form of government in other countries as well. Soviet Union encouraged similar uprising in Cambodia and rise of dictator like Pol Pot, and in North Korea the dictatorship of Kim Jong-un family, right? And likewise, Germany's Hitler encouraged dictatorship of Francisco Franco in Spain. So that means even if a country does manage to do better, which I have already shown you, does not manage to do, it still leads to a chaotic world full of dictators, autocratic dictators. Those dictators might not be benevolent and they might be actually bloody. The dictator of North Korea has actually turned the entire state of North Korea into slavery, into practical slavery. Pol Pot government of Cambodia killed millions in massacre. So we believe, even at their best case, we still do a lot better. We have clearly taken the debate.
With the opposition party supporting fragile democracy over benevolent dictatorship, our deputy leader has given a notion that a rich will be more richer and the poor will be more poorer. With that notion, we are at the time of a short break, and we will be right back.
Welcome to our enriching part, where you interact with our expert advisors, explore your career opportunities, test your potential, and truly begin your educational journey abroad. for a brighter tomorrow. Education Park. Call us for more details.
Mercy Education is committed to providing you with the best available pathways for Australia, USA, UK, Canada and New Zealand. Our services includes confidential career counseling from our expert counselors, proper guidance and assistance through every step of the application process, easy way for visa processing, preparing the student for visa interview. We provide thorough training and comprehensive practice to ensure high score in the following test preparation classes: IELTS, TOEFL, SAT, PTE. We make sure that you achieve your dream of studying abroad. Mercy Education.
शिक्षाको लागि अस्ट्रेलिया गन्तव्य तपाईको साथ हाम्रो ऑस स्टडीज।
Welcome back. Now I would like to call upon our next speaker, Wim from the ruling party. I'd like to ask him to come forward and share his views on this matter.
Panel, when you disregard every facet of developing countries that entail populism, radicalization, economic stability as the requirement for developing nations, and ethnic diversity, that's the moment when you lose a debate, panel. There are three comparatives and three clash points that I'm going to bring in this debate. First is the clash point on stability, second is on organic change, and third is on rights, and fourth is on an absurd argument about redistribution. So let's look at them one by one in this debate. One, they tell us that redistribution happens under their side. We tell you that dictatorships, where in an age where democracy and democratic values are preached so much all around the world, we tell you that dictatorships, there's always a looming threat over dictatorships of being overthrown, right? So we believe that dictatorships are more likely to, one, listen to people, second, unite people through nationalistic values. Because look at the condition of Russia in the 19th century, right? Because Tsar did not redistribute the wealth, the Workers' Party and the Bolsheviks and the Lenins, they revolted against Tsar. Because Tsar did not redistribute these wealths, we believe that revolution happened. So dictators now, benevolent dictators now, are more likely to listen to people and unite people under our side. But more importantly, they tell us about rights like autonomy and free speech, right? We have already given you a comparative over media, where media institutions are controlled by political party. We see this in the most democratic country in the world, USA, where the Fox News is controlled by the Republican Party, where other organizations like Aastak are politically inclined. So we believe that proper discourses and proper media information does not happen under their side, which they claim to be. But moreover in this debate, second argument about stability, right? We tell you that there's constant destabilization under their side of the house. So what do you get on the prop side? You get one, stability. Second, you get organic changes on the outside, right? Because notice that information and technological advancements that they talk about also, countries with benevolent dictatorship also require technological advancement, right? Panel, the choice here is simple and the adjectives are self-evident. You're choosing between benevolence and fragile. The words benevolence itself trumps against fragile. Believe that that's where the debate lies. We're very proud to affirm.
Thank you to the speaker from the ruling party. Now, it's time for the opposition party to give his views on this matter. I'd like to call upon the opposition wimp to share his views.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are 7 billion people in this world with 7 billion ideas of what a perfect world should look like. They tell us that one person, a dictator who is benevolent, no matter what adjective you add before one person, is going to come up and tell me that I should live in that world, and the world that he imagines is a perfect world, and that is the world that I should live in. That is the world that my children should live in, right? So what we tell you is that people should have the right to decide what is proper development for themselves. People should be able to vote for right policies. People should be able to stand up in elections and create that development themselves. Why that is important, we told you, was because firstly, when someone develops certain things, right? These are not the things that we consented to. Like the Prime Minister, like the opposition leader told you, that if someone develops a country at the expense of environment, that is not something certain people would consent to, and they would like to vote for some other policies, right? And that is something that they don't allow in their house, and they say that it is okay because these people are getting food, these people are getting rights, right? But that is not the kind of development that people want to see, because people want to actually be a part of this development. They want to choose the kind of development that they want to be a part of. Secondly, they talk about stability, and they say stability is there in their side. Understand why that's not true, right? Because even if there is a dictator or whether there is a political party, the dictator has equal incentive to suppress the minorities, because when you are benevolent towards the state, you cannot be benevolent towards people, right? Economic growth, if you want to develop economically, then you have to control resources. As a dictator, to remain in power, you have to oppress the minorities, and because of that, you will not be able to actually do good for every people, because your ideology will not be the ideology of all the people in that nation. We told you there are right-wing or left-wing, or there are people who are conservative, or there are people who are liberals, right? Also, they talked about stability in the long term. Understand, in the long term, we already told you through the deputy leader of opposition that in the long term, the stability is not going to exist anyway, because as the resources are distributed or as the country develops with economic growth, people will actually know that they want to make policies for themselves, right? That is why dictatorships have not actually sustained for so long, except in certain countries like China, where there is extremely autocratic government which oppresses human beings, and there is massive oppression of human rights, right? So in the long term, it is going to fail anyway, and because of that, there is going to be massive problems because of that, because in the long term, when that dictator has to leave his throne, then there will be a massive conflict in society. For instance, that is happening in Syria, right? We also, in the deputy leader's speech, we told you the mechanism of power transfer that happens in dictatorship is extremely difficult for certain people. Understand, like in Singapore, when we say Lee Kuan Yew was a benevolent leader, today the leader that is governing that state is Lee Hsien Loong, right? Now that leader is not as benevolent as his father was. So this mechanism of power transfer, which happens from a father to son, is not going to make these people benevolent anymore, right? So the oppressive regimes like in China are going to come there anyway, because these states have incentive to become oppress people to maintain power. But this incentive is also going to transfer to other countries in our side of the house. Thirdly, we also told you why civil societies become better in our side, because in our side people have active incentive to vote, people have active incentive to take part in elections, and because of that people have a responsibility to know more about politics and actively get involved in politics, right? So because of this, people will form civil societies, go to street, demonstrate against wrong things that government do, and because of that, although maybe development will be slow, but that will be development that people want to see, that will be a development that will be stable in long term, and that will be the kind of development that people want to see, right? And also the class difference that he talked about is going to exacerbate under dictator, where elite people are going to become richer, and eventually when the dictator falls, that class difference is going to exacerbate the problems, and people are going to have to struggle more. So we are very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Now it's time for a short break.
Be strong as iron. Be precious as gold. Golden Gate International College, Wisdom Tower, Trikoti Colony, Old Baneswar, 32 Putali, Kathmandu. Phone 4477 082 4466 795 4495 165.
Study in Canada. Start journey with Maple Education. Think Canada. Think Maple. Putali Sadak, Kathmandu.
Your call?
Thanks, babe.
के छ यार तेरो खबर?
मेरो त दामी छ यार, युनिभर्सिटी नि बवाल पाइहाले, जब नि दामी छ, अर्निङ नि दामी छ. I'm too satisfied man, too satisfied.
एडमिसन त सँगै गरियो, बेकारमा क्लास नगएर. अब म पनि SIC बाटै अस्ट्रेलिया प्रोसेसिङ गर्छु.
SIEC Study in Australia.
I'm the best. I'm the best.
You are the next. You are the next.
You are the next.
Welcome to the Next Education Consultancy. We provide classes for IELTS, PTE and abroad study counselling for Australia and New Zealand. The Next Education Consultancy. Head office Putali Sadak, Kathmandu.
It's a new day today. Not a day to make excuses, not to put it off for tomorrow. It's about today. It's your chance. This is your opportunity. It's your dream. Live it. Push forward. Turn the average into the extraordinary. Steadfast in your commitment and then you'll still have work to do. Because stopping is not your option. Promise yourself to be an achiever. Make success into your reality. So why settle for anything less? Professional Education Consultancy. Connecting to success.
Mates Education. अब हामी भएका छौं Mates International. We provide IELTS preparation classes, abroad study counseling program for study in Australia and many more. Mates International, Shahid Chowk, Narayangarh, Cinema Road, Parsa.
Are you interested to study in Australia? Visa guidance under registered migration experts. Study abroad for a greater tomorrow. Scope Student Services.
Welcome back. We are almost at the end of speaker session. Now, I'd like to call upon a concluding speaker from the opposition party.
Proposition side would like us to believe that violence is when these ethnic divides happen, when these people conflict. But we believe that violence is when an individual is forced to subjugate to the will of another individual. When a dictator defines whether or not you can speak, whether or not you can express, whether or not you come into the table to discourse. We see that their argument about right to vote having to have some consequences is flawed in on itself, because this is a principal right that affirms to human dignity. Irrespective of the consequences that I get, I need the right to vote. Whether or not my leader gets elected is a different question altogether. Whether or not I see the kind of development that I want to is a different question altogether. But me being involved in political discourse is the most important thing in the strategy. What we saw, a dictator is someone who centralizes the power as opposed to decentralizing among them. That is to mean, even at the expense of certain people, killing certain people, if you benefit of millions of people, that is not justified, because that individual did not deserve to die. And the dictator, having one particular ideology, represents that particular ideologies and is able to force the people of other ideologies to succumb to his views. We also showed off how the power transition mechanism is very harmful. Even if the dictator is benevolent, there is mechanisms in place in democracy where the individual who loses once or dies or gets removed by the people gets to be voted again, right? There are other accountable factors in there. But in their side, once a dictator dies, the power transition occurs with his family members. It is confined to people related to him, someone who holds dear. That cannot be a benevolent dictator again. So the problem of stability does not occur in the long term. Next thing that we told is, in any situation, this has a tendency to go towards more autocratic regime or a fragile democracy in on itself. What happens when you go to a fragile democracy 40 years after? The problem that occurs is because we came late in that situation, we'll be far behind in terms of perceptional rigidity, perceptional flexibility in comparison to other countries who have already reached there. Because we came there late, that is why we're going to have problems in terms of perceptional rigidity. So notice that the metric to judge is not just on the actual consequences, but also among the perceptional fluidity that these people have and the intrinsic right of human dignity. We are very proud to.
I'd like to call upon the concluding speaker from the ruling party.
Panel, the opposition team has been absolutely unfair to us because they debated on the grounds of a cruel dictator and the best form of democracy. When from my speech and from literally all the speeches of the members of proposition, we've constantly told you that this is a benevolent dictator, a dictator that cares about the people, a dictator at the very least cares about his own power, so will cater towards the people. But they constantly bring out examples of cruelty and examples of North Korea, and we think that they've limited the debate throughout the debate, and that's absolutely unfair to us, and that's something that you need to consider. This entire debate can be summed up in one question. On which side are people happier? Let's look at the claims that they've made. First, they've said that people have the right to vote. We think that when this side has corrupt politicians who don't represent them or who prioritize themselves over the people, this sort of representation is not present. And if they say that our dictator is not accountable despite of being benevolent, we think that these sort of politicians are not accountable too. We think that there's absolute political instability where policies are never passed. In that sort of system, there is no actual representation. We think that this vote is worthless because this is a bought vote. We think that that is also very problematic. In fragile democracies, we see things like bad governmental services, where people are literally dying because they don't have access to healthcare, where they don't have food in their stomach. We think that right to a good life, right to healthcare, right to good school, right to a stable job is much more important than this theoretical right to vote or right to democracy. They bring out the idea of political discourses. We think that political discourses doesn't happen if people are not willing to talk to each other. They give examples of this debate, but we think that people are so much divided on grounds of ethnicity, on grounds of religion and whatnot, right? We think that people have no incentive to be together and sit on a table and talk to each other. They bring out the idea that there's redistribution of wealth and power. They don't tell us how it happens. It's an absolute bizarre claim. But more than that, we think that even in democracy, because it's a fragile democracy, that's democracy at its worst, we think that people who are on top of social pyramid are the people who hold power. We think that politicians actively also preach things such as nepotism. If we have today someone who's, they claim that dictators will pass their power to their children. We think that nepotism is something that exists in politics too. They've been absolutely unfair to us in this debate. Please do consider that. That is why we proudly propose.
It's a time to hear a precious feedback from our panel of judges. I'd like to ask Surendra sir, how do you find the presentation of our speakers?
First of all, we find the benevolent dictatorship in Germany in the 18th century. King Emmanuel I was the propounder of this theory. But nobody spelled out this king's name. I don't know why. This is the historical part of the benevolent dictatorship. Checking name the historical part of this, you see all six enjoy taking the name of the dictator of North Korea, this Libya, even China. Your stress was maybe benevolent dictators are ruling in China nowadays. Suppression of Rohingya by the democratically elected ruler of Myanmar. This is one, but you did not mention the South Korean case. Some took, of course, the Singapore, but very recently, Pakistan, Imran Khan can be one of the benevolent. Pak Chung-hee, who created South Korea, was a military dictator, but created South Korea. Our Prithviraj Shah, who created this Nepal. Jang Bahadur, who eliminated the Bhardars clash and killing between themselves. He gave one type of permanent rule there. Some took the name of King Birendra, who studied Oxford and Tokyo, even Harvard. Nobody took the name of King Mahendra, who gave the infrastructure of this nation. Now all these are the, raw materials, I think, intellectually. See? Among these facts and figure, we have to build what actually the meaning of benevolent dictatorship and the fragile democracy. We are exercising democracy now. I think this is also a fragile. Now we have to give the way out. What types of democracy, whether the benevolent or the democracy like this, would be the model for us? I think this is the question. This was the crux of the questions. Sorry to say, I didn't see any, focal point on this. This is not that your presentation was not good. In fact, it was really, really appreciable and good. This is only I want to just put as complimentary for your future discussion. The rest, it was very nice. Both groups presented a nice presentation. I give all the best for two groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Surendra sir, for your wonderful insights, and I hope the qualified team will be taking these constructive criticisms in the next episode. So I'd like to ask Sanchita ma'am, how do you find the presentation of our speakers?
Oh wow, it was wonderful. Both the team are very nice speakers. Actually, I think she is the best one, Prime Minister, when I saw her. She's the best speaker also. And all the best for you, both of teams.
Thank you, Sanchita ma'am. Also, I'd like to ask our judge, Ramesh sir, how do you find the speaker's presentation?
Well, their presentation is very nice from both sides. I enjoyed a lot. What I found is from the ruling party, their presentation is very well. Their presentation and style. But in case of opposition party, their logic, I enjoyed a lot. Anyway, there is some shortage, So you have given so many examples regarding benevolent dictatorship and fragile democracy of the foreign countries. But you haven't defined what is benevolent democracy and what is fragile democracy. So what's the difference between benevolent democracy and fragile democracy? Number one. Number two, in Nepalese context, you haven't explained which part is benevolent one and which one is fragile one. Because you are discussing in parliament. You are the ruling party. So is this government benevolent government, or is this government, is this democracy, is fragile democracy? You have to define that first. So what do you want in future? You want in future, you believe in benevolent democracy, or right now you believe in benevolent democracy? Likewise, what about you? So we have to discuss this way. But anyway, I like the presentation from both sides. I enjoyed a lot, and I hope good wishes for both the team.
The topic for discussion for today's debate competition was, this House prefers benevolent dictatorship over fragile democracy in developing nation. For the ruling parties, we had Sarva Shaktiman team, whereas for the opposition party, we had three logos. Now is the time to reveal the winner of this debate competition. And for that, I'd like to ask Ramesh sir to announce the winner of this discussion.
Well, the result may be a little disappointing because this is also the 19th, 20th. We discussed with each other, and then we took mean, from our points we have given to each person and each team.
Yeah.
I suggest to the organizer, if there is possibility, to include both the team in the future debate competition. If there is possibility, this is not only my, but our panel of judges request to the organizer, because both of them expressed very well. Anyway, we have to decide, and today's winning team is opposition. Thank you. Congratulations to opposition. And I said congratulations to the ruling party also. Don't be disappointed. Both of you expressed very well, and both the teams are the deserving team. Thank you very much.
The result is out, and we know the winner. For today's Debate Star English series first new episode, winner is the opposition party, Team 3 Logos. Congratulations. We are almost at the end of the event, and now I'd like to request each team to cross the floor and shake their hands to appreciate each other. The hunt for the new debate star will go on. But for that, you have to wait for the next episode. And for the next and new episode, we will be coming up with more interesting and new topics with new speakers. Till then, stay tuned and keep watching Debate Star.
Title sponsor, Education Park, in association with Mercy Education, powered by OS Studies, IELTS partner, British Council, brought to you by Golden Gate International College, Maple International Education, main sponsor, SIEC, sponsors, METS International Education and Visa Services, The Next Education Consultancy, Scope Student Services, Professional Education Consultancy, Cambridge Institute of Technology, Banking partner, Everest Bank Limited. Co-sponsors, Oasis Career Advisor, supported by Hisan, in partnership with Debate Network Nepal, organized by Abhiyan Multimedia. Media partner, Annapurna Sampurna. Creative partner, Fulcrum Consulting Private Limited. Exclusively on News 24 Television.